Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Close Up. I'm Leah Zinder. And good evening to Riki Cohen from Hadera. Mrs. Cohen is the metaphorical Israeli woman invoked by newly installed Finance Minister Yair Lapid. As we all know by now, Lapid, who's not giving any interviews, wrote on his Facebook page that the mythical Riki Cohen, age 37, married with 3 children and a combined monthly income of 20,000 shekels, is the Israeli who must be helped, even though the national debt has ballooned to dangerous proportions. And here in the studio to discuss the options before the Finance Minister and what they mean for us Israelis are 2 eminent social and economic analysts, Dr. Dan Ben-David, Executive Director of the Taub Center for Social Policy Research in Israel, and Pinchas Landau, who is a renowned economic analyst. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for being here. And, of course, we'll begin with Riki Cohen, who has already become part of Israeli mythology. Dr. Ben-David, let's start with you. Is she the person in Israel that the Finance Minister, Yair Lapid, needs to be thinking about at this time?
I think that should be thinking about all of us, and I think that he was reminded of that quite a bit over the past couple of days. I think much of the issue, this whole discussion of should we be helping middle class or poor, is completely irrelevant. We have a situation here where the entire country is on some very stable long-run trajectories, which will be bad for these guys and bad for these guys. And helping out the poor by giving them more tools and conditions to work in a modern economy also helps us in terms of growth. In other words, core treatment of the primary problems that we have will be beneficial both for dealing with...
What are those primary problems?
First of all, our productivity in Israel is one of the lowest in the West, and it's falling farther and farther behind Western countries for the past 40 years.
And how do we fix it?
We give, first of all, a better education system to our children, better access to cities and places where there are jobs. In other words, a much better transportation infrastructure and a much better human capital or education infrastructure.
Okay, let's take a pause now. Pinchas Landau, what do you think? Should we be helping Riki Cohen, and is education the answer?
Education is certainly part of the answer. Riki Cohen is, with all due respect to Mrs. Cohen, a red herring. The issue is not Riki Cohen, the rich, the middle class, or the poor Riki Cohen. The issue is much more, as Professor Ben-David has been saying, structure of the economy, long-range problems, and how you get to grips with them. And the issue is certainly not what we are being force-fed with, which is how to cut 20 billion shekels from this year's budget.
What, you're saying we don't need to cut 20 billion?
We do need to cut 20 billion shekels into Aliyah, amongst many other things we have to do, and that is not a big deal. It is a political problem. They have to sit around the table and decide which budgets are going to be cut and by how much, which tax is going to be raised by how much. The whole issue is 2% of the national income, and it's really not a big deal.
So I'll tell you what may be a big deal. The recent OECD Better Life Index just came out. You may have seen it. And in it, Israel is dangerously low. I believe 29th out of 36 nations as far as education is concerned, what you mentioned. 28th as far as housing is concerned. That's not a good reflection of our economy. So everything is not all right. What has to change? Let's start with you, Pinchas, this time.
What has to change is clearly the overriding need to mainstream the marginal populations into the economy. We talk about the Israeli economy and Israel and the Israeli population as if it's a homogeneous mass, and of course it isn't. And there are large sections of the population who are, to a greater or lesser extent, marginalized or even completely outside, and they have to be brought back in.
How? Brought back in how? Again, are you talking about education again?
First and foremost education, but of course education is part of a much wider cultural milieu and mindset, and these issues have to be addressed, and indeed they are being addressed. And I think I would perhaps part company with Dr. Ben-David in saying that the issues are very clearly on the table. They have been clear for some years. Progress has begun to be made. Things are changing in the right direction. What needs to be done is much more and much faster.
Lapid so far is talking about increasing VAT by 1% and applying it to fruits and vegetables, something that will hit the poor and the working classes very, very hard. Talking about increasing income tax. Is that the way to go?
We've done that. We've increased the income tax. We've increased VAT. Again, there are various taxes. They have to think how much they want to do via taxes. There are various spending areas. They have to decide how much. It is a major mistake to get bogged down in this 20 billion shekels of budget accounting.
Okay. Dr. Ben David, your institute studies the social effects of economic policies. What, if these plans are implemented as they appear to be, what will this mean to Israelis?
I agree with Pinchas. I think this is too good an emergency or non-emergency situation to waste. We have some long-term problems here, and instead of dealing with raising this tax or raising that tax, we need to focus on these issues in general. There has been a certain change in the mindset in terms of some of the issues that Pinchas mentioned, but in terms of the overall problems, it's too slow and very, very far from meeting what we need to meet in the time frame that we have and to fix things while we still can.
Okay. Please go on.
Look, if we're talking now about a major budget deficit, let's start off with something that Lapid raised in the elections. Where's the money going? I have no idea. If you look at the budget and you try to look at who's getting what in this economy, in this country, I don't know. So before we start raising money, let's start asking where is it really going. Then also ask the question, if you're raising taxes for me and for you and for Pinchas, wait a moment, who's paying income taxes? Only 49% in this country are paying income tax. What's going on here? Are we really following and implementing tax laws the way they should be? About a quarter of our entire economy is a shadow economy. The cost of enforcement is going to be a lot less than what we're going to pick up if we enforce. So maybe we should start talking about the structural issues here instead of this point and that point.
Okay. All right. Well, I want us all now to hear something quite provocative, I think. To some people, Lapid's policies so far sound familiar. They are similar to those implemented by Benjamin Netanyahu when he was finance minister and now as prime minister. So now I'd like you to hear the views of someone who advised Prime Minister Netanyahu when he was still finance minister, and I believe had considerable influence on him. His name is Daniel Doron. He has been writing for the Wall Street Journal for many years, and he's an economic analyst. And let's hear what he has to say about what the condition of the economy and what needs to be done.
Well, I think we should thank heavens that finally we have, not finally, there were others, like notably Benjamin Netanyahu, but very few of our finance ministers ever bothered about the Israeli citizen, ever asked the question, why is it in a country that has arguably the best human capital in the world, Israel has more startups than all of Europe, a country the size of Greater Philadelphia, 7 million people, has as many startups, almost as many, as all the continental US. This is a phenomenal concentration of talent. Now add to that since its founding, $300 billion from foreign sources have been invested into this country. The combination of physical capital and human capital of such richness should have produced one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
You're saying privatize, 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 cut down the size of the bloated government, as you say?
Don't privatize. Privatized in Israel never occurred. It was the sale of public assets to cronies. And mostly they didn't bring a penny to buy it. They took the money from the nationalized banks, and with that they bought our assets. It's not the government's, it's the taxpayers' assets. And our politicians gave them away to their cronies because everybody knows the reasons why they love each other. You know, they serve each other's interests.
The question now is, We have a huge government deficit. We have to find the money. Do we take the money from the child allowances, from the working poor? Do we take it from Ricky Cohen? Or do we take it from Yitzhak Shuva, who is paying less in royalties and tax on the gas fields than almost any other Western country?
Do you remember Ariel Sharon, when he would be asked a question, he would also say, yes, but this is not the question. And I'm going to tell you the same. Balancing the budget is not the question. It can be done tomorrow easily by cutting excess waste from government. There is no reason in the world to put one agora additional taxes on the Israeli citizen. Whoever does that is simply continuing the same old system, milk and milk and milk the citizens, take productive money away from the citizen and give it to the bureaucrats who usually waste it.
You're saying do not raise VAT? Raise income tax?
Lower taxes everywhere.
Where will the money come from?
Well, it's short term, you might have a hole, but you'll create such a spurt of growth that government will collect more in taxes.
By doing what? Exactly.
By two things. The major thing is to release the enterprising instinct the Jews all over the world had and that sustained them through 2,000 years of very difficult exile.
Mr. Doron, that sounds vague and it's abstract.
No, wait, I'm coming to the point. There are small businesses in Israel. Do you know why the Negev and the Galilee don't develop? What is your guess?
Because I don't think anybody has devoted sufficient energy, money, or attention to making a change.
They have. The government at least made 5 attempts that cost billions to revivify the Negev and the Galilee. Every time Peres comes into the fore, he has a plan to revivify the Negev and the Galilee. What does he do? He brings a lot of government money. What do they do with the money? They put a pile in the middle of the street and everybody comes and takes? No. It goes to, first of all, failing enterprises because they are releasing workers, so it's an emergency, we have to save them. You save the failing ones. They should fail, so that others, good ones, can take their place. And then you give to the politically connected, the cronies of the mayors and so forth and so on. So all those, if you want to make a list of all the places in Israel who underperform economically, you'll have the exact list of all the places that government assisted in a major way with billions and billions of our money.
What would you do with the money?
Not money. The question is not money. The question is control, freedom. Balancing the budget is wonderful. What you need is a spurt of growth. And the spurt of growth is waiting to happen. Israelis are like a coiled spring. Just release the spring and you'll have growth. When we did the Bahar reforms, people said, oh, it will be terrible and so on. And they still say so. They still say so. But what happened after Bahar? The public savings more than doubled from 1.2 trillion to 2.4 trillion shekels. And that's during the big 2008 crisis. And we had a spurt of growth, 5 years of 5% growth, the highest in the world. So there is, if I'm sure Lapid is wise enough to recognize the huge talent that there is there in this middle class that he represents, and that they don't need government help. They need to get the government off their backs.
All right. Dr. Ben David, I imagine you're not a fan of Milton Friedman, but doesn't he have a point, Daniel Doron? Get the government off our backs. The answer is not in government spending. He says not even in education. Just let the Israeli spirit riot free.
Well, as a graduate of the University of Chicago, where Milton Friedman came from, I actually sympathize with a lot of the views. But look, in general, I agree with him. But here's the problem. It's not a free world, it's not a free economy, and it's not a free... not everyone is born equal. We know that children's achievement in school is highly correlated to their parents' education level, especially the mothers. And if we just say, all right, go out and do your thing, when you have uneducated parents bringing up children, those children are in bad shape. This is basically a market failure, and you need to help these children out. One way to do it, one of the topics that's now on the table, is child allowances. Should we cut them? What should we do with them? One of the things that is missing from this is, wait a moment, what is the purpose of child allowances? Is it to increase the number of children being born, because that doesn't work except for Haredim and Bedouins in the Negev? Or is it to help poor families? If it's to help poor families primarily by helping their children, so wait a moment, there are better ways to do this. Why not give them a hot meal in school? Give them a longer school day. There's 7 billion shekels out there that are child benefit. Why don't we start off by saying, all right, if you send your kid to a school that gives a core curriculum, so that kid eventually is going to learn something,
right,
only those schools will get a hot lunch and an extended day. Then we're starting to spend this money on those children, but in a way that helps those children.
And allowing people to, especially women, of course, to work a full day rather than a half day.
I mean, use it wisely.
Right.
Use
Absolutely.
it directly on the children and get something from it, because you make a condition. Only schools that give a core curriculum, so those kids will end up with something afterwards.
Right. Pinchas Land, I want to talk to you about one of the things that Daniel Doron was talking about, and that is cronyism. It's corruption. It's giving away, our national treasures and giving all sorts of favors to political cronies. How entrenched is this in Israel, and how dangerous is it?
Let me make a more general point, of which this is a part. We're all talking about the Israeli economy as if it has severe problems. All the countries in Europe, without any exception, and most countries in the world, would love to be in our position,
That's
in our
absolutely
situation.
True.
When Netanyahu and Lapid sit down at the cabinet table, they have the luxury of saying, we are coming off 7 years of growth, we have to make certain adjustments in the budget, we have money to spend. Dan Ben David is talking about how the money should be spent, how the resources. In Southern Europe, in most of Northern Europe, and in North America, when they finally face reality, the issue is not what to spend money on, but where to make swinging cuts. The Israeli economy is on very positive tracks compared to Western Europe, compared to North America. Our labour force is growing, their labour force is shrinking. Our balance of payments is in surplus, theirs is in deficit. We have the opportunity, even before the gas is the icing on the cake, we have the opportunity to do almost whatever we want. It is entirely a political, i.e. cultural, issue. And the second point I want to make is that we just come off elections. The elections were fought for the first time over socio-economic issues. The burning question in this election, no outsider can understand it, who is going to be the housing minister? Not who's going to be the defense minister, not are we going to bomb Iran. Americans in general, American Jews, think we're obsessed with Iran.
Can the government solve the housing problem here?
Of course it can. The government can solve the housing problem, the education problem, and all the other problems because it has the money to do so. Mm-hmm. All it needs is the political will. There is a socio-political upheaval underway in this country, which is now 2 or 3 years old, and which is just getting underway, which Yair Lapid is the standard bearer for. If he doesn't deliver, he will be cast aside, and others will rise to take over the challenge. But that's where it's going.
Okay. Well, now, the last topic that we'll be dealing with today is this, of course, one of the most dramatic developments in Israel's economic life, which occurred over the weekend when natural gas began to flow from the Tamar offshore gas fields. Gas from the Leviathan field, one of the largest in the world, will follow in 2017. This find will give Israel decades of energy independence and is also paving the way for Israel to become an exporter of natural gas. I talked today with Dr. Uzi Landau, who's now Minister of Tourism, but until just a few days ago, he was the Minister for Energy and Water Resources, and he, in fact, brought the natural gas project to fruition in cooperation, of course, with its American and Israeli shareholders. He says the gas is the most important growth generator in Israel's history and will increase the GNP by 1%. And all that is spectacularly good news. The question now is, will we, the ordinary Israelis, benefit from this extraordinary national treasure? Mr. Minister, ordinary Israelis are asking themselves, what's in it for us, this vast treasure, this resource that was discovered? What is in it for the ordinary Israeli?
Well, very immediately, I would say, immediately lower electricity prices in the future, and high potential for many more, I would say, industries which are going to rely on this less expensive energy source. I guess that many other industries in Israel could now become much cheaper and will improve their competition abilities. Let me add that this is also going to provide Israel with perhaps alternative fuels for transportation. The Ministry of Energy these days has been running a project where we perhaps could find either those derivatives of natural gas, such as methanol, such as GTL, such as CNG, which is compressed natural gas, that could be used in transportation and could replace, to a certain extent, the regular fuel, which are costly, which are air polluting, and you would like to replace them. On top of that, you have geopolitical effects of that. First of all, we could, if they so choose, export natural gas to Jordan, to our Palestinian neighbors.
Now, Norway has taken all the revenues from its oil production and created a sovereign wealth fund. I believe they now have in excess of $700 billion, all for the benefit of Norway's citizens. What is Israel doing?
Well, Israel is now trying to learn from the experience of many other countries. Norway is one of them, which is a highly good example, highly good experience. Holland, for example, is another very negative experience. And what we are trying to do, this will be decided through the next few years, exactly what is the best way suitable for Israel. How to best use the natural resources, revenues, which are going to be obtained from those finds for the Israeli citizen. Whether it's going to go to education, to social support, to whatever it is, but that's exactly the issue. What are we going to do with this money?
What are we going to do with the money? Pinchas Landau, let me start with you. You've already said, I believe, what we need to do with the money, and I think we all agree on that. But isn't it time for the government to take sterner action, not against the tycoons, but to try to get from the tycoons the money that they should be pouring into the Israeli economy?
There's no need. The tycoons is another paper tiger. Half of them are bankrupt, others will go bankrupt.
But when they go bankrupt, when they lose money, they give us a haircut and we, the public, end up paying for it. That's
right. That's capitalism. You want capitalism, you have to have the whole 9 yards. The tycoons are not the problem. The government isn't really the problem. The government has to get its act together, has to focus on what needs to be done for the whole country over the long term. That's very difficult, right? Dan Ben David has talked about the critical issue of transportation. If there won't be a subway or an overway in Tel Aviv in 5 or 7 years' time, the city will simply grind to a halt. Therefore, there will be. If the Haredim won't get education, they will starve to death. Therefore, they will. These processes have to happen, and Yair Lapid and the other politicians have to rise to the challenge, make them happen quickly and effectively.
Okay, Dan Ben David, do you think there's a realistic chance that it can happen? Politicians don't like long-term projects because they usually end when somebody else becomes the minister.
I think something very unique happened in this past election. It's the second wave of the social protest, but we have almost 50 new Knesset members out of 120. We've never been in this area before, and as Pinchas said, this election was the first one that had nothing to do with our neighbors. It had to do with the issues. Now, the issues were just the tip of the iceberg. You spoke about housing. The reason housing is expensive is not just because we have land that belongs to the government, it's because we didn't build where land is cheap. We didn't connect these areas to where there are jobs. We didn't give the best schools in these areas. But if we did, not only would we solve the housing problem, we would solve the problems of the education that those kids receive, of the jobs for their parents. We'd start dealing with the core issues, but we need to do it very quickly. And that's part of the issue that we're facing here. We have some major structural issues. We're in a good period, like was mentioned earlier, but you have to be careful. It's a good period because it follows a really bad period a decade ago. And ever since then, we've been coming out. The long-run trend is a very severe problem, and we have to fix that, and we have to focus on that when we deal with these problems today.
Okay, and we're out of time. I'm going to ask each of you, in one sentence, to give the most important advice that you can think of to the new finance minister with his unenviable job, Yair Lapid, Pinchas?
Don't get bogged down in the bean counting of the Treasury officials. Have a big vision, as you claim to have, and run with it.
Okay. Dan?
I agree with him completely, Kluma. Just look at the big picture. Solve the big problems and use this crisis to fix the big things. Don't deal just with symptoms. Deal with the core issues.
Okay. Well, we're out of time. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do write to us at ibatvnews@gmail.com. I'd like to thank my guests for today, Pinchas Landau, Dr. Dan Ben-David. Thanks to Dennis Zinn. Thank you for watching Close Up. And until next time, have a great evening. Shalom from Jerusalem.